Hello and welcome to the Enthusiast series at the Whisky Baron. Today I have a very, very special interview. I'm sat here in central London with Robert Fleming, Master Distiller at Tomintoul Distillery, who's also celebrating 50 years in the industry this year. Robert, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Doesn't seem like 50 years, but they tell me it is.
Time's flown by then.
The time has certainly flown by over the decades, and enjoyed every minute of it. It's fantastic.
So, 50 years ago, where did you start in the industry?
I started, I was born and brought up in the Glenlivet area, obviously very famous for the Glenlivet distillery. My father, my grandfather and great-grandfather all worked at the distillery.
Okay.
I didn't know my grandfather or great-grandfather, but my dad, he started working there in the 1950s. And when I was born, from a very young age, probably about maybe 9 or 10 years of age, my dad would take me down to the distillery. And I used to hang out with the guys that worked there. In those days, they had floor maltings.
Yep.
So I used to play around, and the guys, the older guys, they made me this sort of small malt shovel. And I had an amazing time just growing up with these guys. Some people think it's a very sad childhood, but no, it was one of the best childhoods that you could ever wish for. So after I'd graduated from grammar school, I took a year out before I'd go to university. But I took a year out and I thought, no, academia is not for me. So I wanted to work at the distillery.
Yep.
But my dad didn't want me to work at the distillery. He said I should get a proper job. So I tried something else for 2 years, or just nearly 2 years. And then I came back to the distillery one day to visit my parents, and the manager of the distillery at that time offered me a job. He didn't promise me, that it would be a fantastic career move. He just said, there's a job if you want it.
Yep.
Started there in 1974, and then worked my way right through all the production, warehousing, production, until 1983, when Chivas Brothers, they had taken over Glenlivet Distiller, and their production director immediately took me out of the production side and put me onto the Chivas management training, which was an amazing experience.
Yep.
Not just because of the different aspects of the industry that you'd never worked in before, but also they put you to different distilleries. And you might think the distilleries are all the same, but believe me, they're not. So I was at Benriach and Longmorn, then back to Glenlivet, Strathyla, Glenkeith, short time at Glengrant, only a few weeks. And then by 1990, I was getting itchy feet again. I really wanted to have my own distillery.
Yep.
to run. So the opportunity came up for Tomintoul, and I joined there, as I say, in 1990. It was owned at that time by White and Mackay.
Yep.
And again, you got involved in every aspect of everything from the raw materials coming in to the whisky going out. So a great learning curve. And then between the 1990 and 2000, I got another distillery to look after called Tomintoul. And then in year 2000, the Hillman family came along. Mr. Hillman, the chairman of the company, he'd built up his business on blended whiskies.
Yep.
So he knew that he wanted to buy a distillery that made spirit for the other people's blends. And we tried to sell him Tomintoul Distillery, but he didn't want it. He wanted Tomintoul.
Okay.
And then the 1st of August 2000, we became part of Angus Dundee. And as I say, it's over 24 years now. And again, it's been an amazing journey since 2000. Amazing journey up to 2000, but also from 2000 to the current 2000 day.
So obviously, you said you were at Tomintoul in 2000, and then Angus Dundee come in and buy the distillery. How do you end up back at Tomintoul?
Well, the thing about Tomintoul was the White and Mackay bought another company in 1994 called Invergordon Distillers.
Yep.
And they immediately because Invergordon had 4 malt distilleries and the grain distillery. And immediately they shut down 3 distilleries. And it wasn't as a distiller, it's not great when people shut down your production,
Yep.
the actual distillery. So although I only ran it for a short period of time, then we shut it down. So basically we just used it for warehousing between 1995 and 2000.
Right.
And but it was very sad that I was actually glad that once we left in 2000, we actually started it for a 6-week run just before we get taken over, because the White Mackay needed the experience of my guys to run Tomintoul for 6 weeks before they shut it down again. So we did that for 6 weeks, and then I was also based at Tomintoul, and it was a very easy transition for me. White Mackay on the last day of July,
Yep.
2000. Angus Dundee, 1st of August, 2000. So it was a very easy transition for me.
Great. And then I guess obviously back to Tomintoul, which you already knew very well by that point.
Well, I was always based at Tomintoul.
Okay.
I was always based there. Tomintoul it's only 10 miles away from where I was based. So, and I didn't run Tomintoul for very long. Tomintoul's been the one I've been running since 1990.
Okay. So yeah, despite a small move, effectively 35 years, near enough at.
Yeah, that's doesn't seem like 35 years, as I said earlier, but it's an amazing place to be. I feel quite this event obviously is for 50 years in the industry, but I'm just part of a team. I always say that I'm just the guy that's looking after the distillery for someone else to come along and take it over. So but I've had an amazing group of people to work with over these 35 years, and still have.
Yeah. What's the single kind of biggest change you've seen in those 35 years?
Lots of changes in 35 years. The reason I went there in 1990 was because the manager who had previously been there, he was what you might call old school.
Yep.
There was a lot of health and safety legislation coming in. There was a lot of environmental legislation. But the biggest move at that time was that the revenue and customs people were moving away from direct control of the distilleries.
Right.
So it was up to the distilleries themselves, the manager obviously, to look after their own security and their own revenue. So he, being old school, he didn't really want to get involved in that. So he took a step down, and I came in and took his job. So that was a one big transition, that everything seemed to happen between the health and safety legislation, the environmental, and the revenue cut, all seemed to happen within maybe a 1 to 2 year period.
Yeah.
And then the other thing and this is more recent, but the way that people now think about distilleries, we have now got to reach targets for by obviously 2050, in fact 2045, that we have to reach them for climate change, for reducing our greenhouse emissions. So one of the things that's coming in, it's been in for the last 5-6 years, but it's sustainability. So when you're speaking to anyone in the industry now, they're always talking about sustainability. How can we reduce energy consumption? What methods, what innovations can we employ to make the distillery more efficient, but also to meet the targets for the energy reduction. So that's quite a big change. The other one, which I was going to mention tonight, but the other one, when I started in even pre-1990, we didn't have people involved in sustainability.
Yep.
We didn't have compliance managers. Sorry to say, there was no social media or influencers, so there was none of that. So I mean, there's been a huge change. Even going back to when I was growing up, there was one expression of Glenlivet, one of Glenfiddich, one Macallan, one Tomintoul. So nowadays, when you look at all the whiskies surrounding us, you've got so many different expressions from every distillery, and obviously now that's got to be communicated to the wider public.
Yeah.
So the growth of single malts over the past 20, 25 years has been quite phenomenal.
And I know you just actually you mentioned before we started filming, you're just back from Cincinnati looking at barrels. Yeah. Presumably back then, the vast majority of the whiskey was going into blends, and presumably a lot of it was going into bourbon and refill bourbon barrels. Whereas now, looking around this room, plethora of different cask types and finishes that are involved.
That's something that there was always, even in the early days when I was in the distilleries, there was always sherry casks.
Yep.
And there was some bourbon, obviously. What they used to do was they used to take the bourbon casks in. They were broken down, so they would remove the hoops, remove the heads, bundle them together, and they would ship them across to the cooperages in Scotland. The cooperages then would rebuild them, but then if they added extra staves to them, they could make bigger casks.
Yep.
So instead of having a 200-litre barrel, which was what they call the ASB, American Standard Barrel, they could make 250-litre hogshead. So a lot of the casks that came in at that time ended up as hogsheads, not really filled as barrels because they wanted bigger volume. We also took in a lot of sherry wood from Spain. It was old Oloroso sherry rather than nowadays a lot of the wood coming in is new oak.
Yep.
Seasoned for 2.5 years. But also, there's quite a few port pipes came in. Port pipes are like big butts, but they're a bit longer.
Yep.
So that was the main. There was no wine influence. There was nothing else in those days. And again, it's probably in the modern era that we're trying to give people different influences as to what the so if they like the Pedro Jimenez finish, the Pedro Jimenez is quite a PX itself is quite a gloopy, raisiny sherry. So if that can be from the empty wood, if that can impart itself into, some people might love that. Some people may not like it. They might prefer something more phenolic and peaty, and so you try and give the customer something that they will like. Yeah. Not everybody likes peated. Not everybody likes like our 16-year-old Tomintoul, which is very light, mellow, easy drinking. They prefer maybe a bit more sweeter and nuttier and different influence on the whiskey.
Yeah.
So we're trying to cover all bases. That would be the reason for a lot of the wine finishes. The wine finishes are not usually mainstream. They're special editions or limited editions, I should say, not special.
I guess a lot of that obviously sits within from the blending point of view. Does it ever come into play from a distillation point of view? Do you ever look at your kind of cut points or anything to say, do you know what, we're going to be filling slightly different types of casks today?
I would love to experiment with the new spirit. I can't. The reason we don't experiment with the new spirit is because because we're a blending company, we need spirit from other distilleries for our blends.
Yep.
But more importantly, it's like an exchange. So they need my spirit for their blends. So we exchange with many different distilleries, famous companies. Our Tomintoul spirit, once matured, might go into some of these famous blends, but like Johnny Walker, Chivas Regal, and all these guys.
Yep.
But they don't tell us what they use our whiskey for, and we don't tell them what we use theirs for, because we obviously introduce it into our blends.
Yep.
So, the blending aspect is very important, and that's why I'm not allowed to play around with the new spirit. However, once I've made the new spirit, I make for 40 weeks of the year is the same every day, every week, every month. For 6 weeks of the year, we make a heavily peated spirit called Ballantruan, and some goes into blends and some goes into a single malt in its own right. However, I'm still not allowed to change cut points or anything on that. All I change for the Ballantruan from the normal spirit is the malted barley. It's heavily peated malted barley. But once you've got the spirit, The next stage is the maturation.
Yep.
And that's when we can really go to town. And that's where, working with Ian and the rest of the team, that's when you can source casks from wineries, from wines that I've never even heard of. You get casks from, and you can fill. Usually it's a finish.
Yep.
So you take anything, maybe an 8 or a 10-year-old Tomintoul, maybe in a first fill bourbon or a refill hogshead, and you finish it in these casks. So there's lots of different ways you can experiment with trying to create something different.
Yeah, nice. And I guess a lot of these relationships that you've had to strike up to get these casks are also kind of relatively new, as in happening kind of over the last 25, 30 years. You know, you mentioned before about port pipes and sherry butts, but from my understanding at least, I'm presuming a lot of those kind of ended up in the UK anyway, because back in the 80s and 90s, the country drank a lot more port and sherry than it does now.
Yeah.
And they were kind of the way that you would just transport things. Now you didn't have to bottle things in Spain and Portugal like you do now. So those casks kind of don't exist, and they certainly don't come over by default to the UK anymore.
No, that's right. And I mean, you're right. In the early days, the casks were shipped with product in them.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to do that nowadays. So we tend to, if we can get old Oloroso casks, that's fine. For the sherry butts, for the Oloroso butts, we tend to go for new wood, seasoned for 2.5 years. For the wine casks, it's we've got a couple of companies who supply wine casks. One that I met about 10 years ago, and they've done an extremely good job. They actually put the barrels or the casks into the winery. They use them and then give them back to the. So they're just renting the casks.
Yeah.
Then they come back into the company, and then that company then goes round all the distilleries and said, look, we've got X amount of different wine casks. So I mean, even Ian does most of the wine casks. I used to do the sherry. I used to go out to Jerez. Started going out there in 2004, and stopped about just pre-COVID, and it was hard work. Well, I'll say it was hard work. It was a nice it was a nice trip to Jerez. But what you mentioned, we built up a special relationship with a family bodega, family cooperage, and a much bigger family. Well, there's a family cooperage and bodega as well. So, so that was the two that we originally sourced from, and then when Ian came on board, he started to source from other suppliers as well, from Jimenez Spinola, and which was the cask for this.
Okay, amazing. We've mentioned the Tomintoul 16 a couple of times. That's what we've got in front of us. So that's obviously been part of the core range as long as I've been drinking whiskey the last dozen years or so. And obviously, you said, you know, the proliferance of single malt is something that's really changed over time as well. You know, presumably this is still is it still the biggest seller in the range?
Yeah, this is the flagship. The way that this came about was under White and Mackay, we had a single malt.
Yep.
But it wasn't promoted because our spirit, well, most of it went for blending.
Yep.
Mr. Hillman came along, and he invited one of his customers to Tomintoul. And my remit was go into the warehouse, select a few casks, and so I went in, and the cask, I wanted something not too old, but not young either. So I went sort of middle range, selected 16-year-old Tomintoul from a number of 5 or 6 casks, and went back to the office with Mr. Hillman and his customer, and they were sitting there, and it was cask strength, obviously.
Yep.
So the two of them were sitting there, nosing, and everything went quiet. You know, there was no speaking, nothing. And I thought, I was actually wasn't facing them at the time, and I turned around as to why they stopped speaking. And the both of them were, and Mr. Hillman just said, this is probably the smoothest, the gentlest dram he's ever tasted. So that's why the gentle dram is on the bottle.
There we go.
So So basically, it was a good choice first time round, going for a 16-year-old. So this has been the sort of the flagship, and we take great care because if you bought a bottle of 16-year-old 2001,
Yeah.
you hope it would be the same 16-year-old quality that you get now.
Yeah.
So the 16-year-old is the one that wins various awards over the years, and we're proud that we can still keep it going. We've got a lot of other ones in the range, but this is still the flagship.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I think things naturally change over time a little bit, right? Barley strains, no doubt, changed since you first started in the industry. Yeast changes a little bit, etc. But I guess if you were to go back 15, 20 years and open up a bottle, should one still be around somewhere, how consistent do you think it would be?
With the Tomintoul going back 15, 20 years, it should be quite consistent. Barley varieties don't really... if you were to go to make a very old heritage like Golden Promise, a lot of people say, it makes a difference. It makes a difference to the yield. But the malted barley that I'm using at the moment is the same that every other company is using as well.
Yep.
Because the varieties do change over a period of time. Going back to when I was at Glenlivet and my dad was at Glenlivet, a lot of their distilleries and other distilleries in that area were slightly peated because they had their own floor maltings.
Yep.
If you travel around Space, travel around Scotland, some of the old distilleries, you see the pagoda roofs.
Absolutely.
Some are, obviously, majority now are not used, but there are 2 or 3 distilleries that have proper kilns, and a lot of their product in 1950s, 1960s would have been light to medium peated, whereas now there'd be no peat in it at all.
Yep.
So go back 50 plus years, yes, there'll be a change. Go back probably 20 years at the moment. A lot of the companies are wanting to keep the staple production, so there wouldn't be a lot of difference in taste. Yeast, we don't experiment with yeast. As I said, I'm not allowed to screw around with the new spirit. So the malted barley is important. The water supply is important, obviously, from the Ballantrae in spring. The yeast we don't change. Fermentation times we don't change. Basically, it's same old since I've been there since 1990.
Yeah, but I think that's important, right? Because for customers, I can look at other malts that I won't name, even in the last 10 years, where they say they're going for consistency, that clearly has been a change, and whether that is running the stills faster or some other way to try and speed up production or change in barrel makeup or whatever, it's clearly not the same, and I can taste that over a 10-year difference rather than even 20 or 30 years. So to be able to say that so confidently is really impressive and incredible.
What we try to do is, again, going back to the very beginning, the way you run your stills, some of them were what they call direct firing, so they had fire underneath. That created a different style to what they have now, where it's indirect firing. They've got steam kettles inside the stills. Very few, in fact, only one distillery recently has gone back to direct firing. The rest of them are still indirect. Now, there's a big one that's still part direct and part indirect. But so that does make a difference. But what you said is right. There are distilleries out there when they don't have the capacity, but they need over the years they've needed the increased capacity.
Yeah.
So what they do is they just speed it up. And the other thing you don't want to do is you don't want to alter the cut points if you can. If you do alter the cut points, that make a difference to the quality of the spirit. The other thing which, again, the jury is out on, that it used to be that cask filling strength used to be 63.5%.
Yeah.
And that was what everybody said, that's by far the best strength. When casks became in short supply, obviously you need more casks to fill at 63.5, so everybody started to fill at that strength, which is about 68.5 to 69.
Yep.
and didn't go back to 63.5. So again, that would have made a difference to it as well. But yeah, anybody that's wanting to, you really need to have consistency in your product, and that's why, as a distiller, it is sad that people would be putting the volume and the bottom line before the quality of the spirit.
On the subject of quality, tonight you're launching a very, very special whiskey indeed.
Absolutely.
50 years old, cask number 500. You said it's an Jimenez Espanola cask.
Yeah, PX cask. It's not been in PX all its life. It's been in PX for the last few years. But again, that gives it that sort of raisiny, sort of dark fruit style finish to it. It's quite. I was very honoured when they said they were launching a 50-year-old with my picture on the front, but because I'm always quite reticent to put myself forward. It's a team effort. I mean, I know it's a bit of an old cliche, but it is a team effort. There's guys that's been. That was distilled in 1973. That was the year before I joined, before I came into the industry. Now that whiskey, I can relate that to the people that made it. I know the people that made that.
Yeah.
Isla Shaw was the manager. Sandy Robertson was the brewer. You had lots of different guys in the production. So I know who actually made that whiskey.
Wow.
Sadly, these guys don't ever see the end result of their skill and expertise, which is a bit of a shame. But I'll drink it to them.
I guess that's one thing, isn't it? You already mentioned, when you said you're kind of looking after distillery for the next person, that really is, I think, probably the best way of looking at it. That it's an industry that has endured despite various peaks and troughs over the years and will continue to, assuming, of course, everything is looked after it with skill, care and passion, which you so clearly have even after 50 years in the industry.
And when we're taking new people into the industry, they've really got to, once they're in the industry, they tend not to leave. Yeah. But they've really got to have, that word that you just used, passion, they've really got to have passion. If you join it just for an 8-to-5 job and taking the paycheck because especially at Tomintoul and Glencadam as well, but especially at Tomintoul, we're not automated.
Yeah.
So I can't sit here on my iPhone and watch production. I have to rely on 2 operators who are there 24 hours, 7 days a week. Different operators, obviously. 24 hours, 7 days a week, making the spirit to a standard that has been handed down from the last few generations.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that Mr. Hillman wanted. He wanted to see people making whiskey, not computers. I sit in the fence with that one. I would have some automation, but at the moment there's none in the production side.
Yeah. I was going to ask you what your kind of top tip would be for someone who was looking to kind of come into the world of distilling, but you've almost kind of answered it straight away.
Different ways. You can come in, start at the very bottom, show a bit of passion, show a bit of wanting to learn, or you can come in. I mean, there's so many different avenues nowadays. I mentioned sustainability, and I mean, if you've got a chemical engineering degree, then again, lots of opportunities within the industry. If you've got a fantastic nose for picking up different flavours and aromas, then you could have a fantastic career. But there's so many different careers within the industry, and it's difficult for me because I started with I didn't go to university, so I started at the bottom, working my way up, but you get others coming in now that are I've got 2 graduates working for me at the moment. They know far more about the technicalities of the yeast strains and the biochemistry than I do. But these guys have got a future within the industry as well. So you can have starting at the bottom, or you can come in with a university degree in whichever field, biochemistry or chemical engineering, and make a good future have a good career in this business.
Yeah. 50 years in the industry, and it sounds like there's no sign of slowing down, or what's next for you?
Who knows? Hopefully wake up tomorrow. I don't know. I'll be 70 next year, and I think at that age I might just like to wind down a bit, without actually giving up all the production aspects. As I say, all the old distillers, they never really retire. They always sort of have an interest in the background.
Yeah.
And whether that interest is setting up on your own and doing some consultancy, or whether it's just taking a lesser role, but advising the younger people coming through, it all depends. So nothing made up yet, but no decision yet. But I'll be 70 next year, so watch this space.
Amazing. Robert, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Once again, many congratulations on 50 years in the industry.
Slàinte.
Thank you, guys. It's been another episode of the Enthusiast series of the Whisky Baron. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much to Robert and Tomintoul for having us this evening. We'll see you again very soon. Slàinte.
Slàinte.